All right, I guess that means we're rocking and rolling here, folks. I am Rick Wilson, one of the co-founders of the Lincoln Project. Welcome to Lunch with Lincoln. I'm sitting in today for Reed Galen, and I am joined by my friend Fernand Amandi today, and we're going to talk some Florida politics because we are both Florida men. And I mean that in the best way. We're both deeply saturated in Florida politics, and to my knowledge, neither of us has ever run down the middle of an interstate highway being chased by a common law wife fighting over the custody of our pet alligator. But it's the day and the season is young. So Fernand, welcome to the show, man. How you been?
Rick, it's good to be here live from the epicenter of Magistan, where, it's a balmy 85 degrees in Miami and, waiting for more COVID counts to come in today.
Well, so. Yeah, you know what? One thing in Florida you can rely on right now is the daily COVID count is going to continue to rise because, Governor DeSantis has decided he is going to stake his political fortunes in 2024 and 22 on being the biggest dick possible about COVID. And I think it's a fascinating kind of moment that we're in that he's starting to feel the bite of his decisions over the last couple of months, because his numbers have dropped pretty precipitously. You've seen that, I'm sure, as a pollster.
Oh, yeah. I mean, just this morning, I saw him drop 6 points. He was above 50% in the last poll, 54. I think today he woke up at 48. So, yeah. Like they say, COVID left a mark on a good old Ronnie. Yeah,
it's funny because, and I've said this before, and, whether I like or dislike a lot of our former governors, okay, I suspect that Jeb Bush or Charlie Crist or Bob Graham or even Rick Scott would have looked at this as a public health crisis and dealt with it appropriately. I don't have to agree with all of them. Charlie and I have never been buddies, but I think all of them would have said, okay, look, I can't take the risk of having, tens of thousands of Floridians get infected and hundreds or thousands die. And I can't put kids at risk who are the new vulnerable group, by forbidding mask mandates and top downing it from Tallahassee. I just can't imagine any of them doing it that way. And now we're in a position where we're paying the price. I mean, and I'm glad he's paying the price, but I mean, the economic disruption is starting to ripple out there, especially in South Florida with the cruises and stuff, right?
Oh, I mean, there's no doubt about it. DeSantis, for all of his freedom and Florida talk, he's wreaking havoc on not just the cruise industry, but a lot of them. And I'm seeing already the ripple effects. You go out in the streets of Miami, and it's not the way one's accustomed to it being in terms of the patronage of the places. And Rick, especially when you think about the fact that there are other countries in the world right now. Hell, there are other states in our beloved United States that aren't necessarily seeing the type of restrictions and things in place in Florida. So I think he's really hurting us, not just in our health and in our lives, but also in the pocketbook. And I think he's going to pay a price for that for the weeks and months to come.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the 2022 elections in Florida. We've got both DeSantis up for re-election for governor and Marco up for the U.S. Senate race. What are your thoughts on where those two races stand right now, just in terms of today and how you see it playing out in the next few months?
Boy, that is the question, because I'll be honest, if the elections were today, I think little Marco and little Ron would have some trouble. I'm not sure that they would make it, and not because of anything spectacular that the Democratic Party is doing. I just think events have kind of conspired against them. But, here in the United States of amnesia, the elections are 14 months away. So, I still think, depending on where we are with COVID, it may not be the landscape. But to your point and to your question, if they were today, I genuinely think they'd be in trouble.
Yeah, I think, I've seen public and private polling that both of them are inside the margin. And look, Florida Republicans are very, 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 very good at campaigning. They are extremely good at campaigning. But I think having, potentially two women facing up against these two guys, especially with everything else that's happening in terms of like the vote in Texas and everything else, I think that might alter the landscape some for 22. But there's a lot of work ahead. But, I wonder about Marco because he made a trip to Iowa the other day, and I'm wondering if there's some like fantasy part of his brain where he thinks he's going to run for president again. I mean, that did not end terribly well last time.
Marco has not had that gene removed from him, despite what Crick Christie did to him in the snowy hills of New Hampshire with that devastation and that degutting, and certainly Trump's thumping of him here, where Rubio lost 66 out of 67 counties. I don't think he's been cured of that. But, Rick, you know this better than anybody. One of the worst kept secrets in Florida politics is that the 4 Republican contenders for the presidency that call Florida home now, they don't exactly like each other all that much. There's a little bit of backstabbing going on. So I think that's another dynamic we need to keep our eye on.
It's true, folks. I mean, right now, if for those of you who are not like deeply submerged in Florida, Marco has run for president, wants to be president desperately, wants to run again, can't necessarily find a path. Ron DeSantis is running for president, wants to find a path. He's the current hot flavor from Fox News. In fact, even Marco's media team now works for Ron DeSantis. Rick Scott, who really, really wants to be president of somewhere in his home galaxy, I guess, but he's desperate to be president too. He believes that he can muscle his way through with his own money. And he's got a lot of it. Let's make no mistake. He's got a lot of money. And of course there's Donald Trump. And I suspect, Fernanda, and I think you've seen this as I've seen in Florida on the ground, there's no substitute for being Donald Trump in Florida. If you're a Republican-based voter, as someone said, it could be, Jesus Q. Reagan, and they'd say, no, that's okay. I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. There's nothing and if you can't win the Florida primary as a Republican presidential candidate these days, hang it up.
Yeah, I think the rule number 1 of MAGA Club is you don't mess with the leader of MAGA Club. So anybody that's thinking they're going to take on Trump, listen, somebody that I really know and love once said, those that try to touch Trump have something that happens to them, and it's usually their political death. And listen, I honestly think that's one thing that DeSantis is starting to discover. He got into the office of governor doing the world's greatest Trump imitation. But now Trump, I think, is starting to sense that might be competition. And that's the one thing Trump does not tolerate. He doesn't want anybody, making the case for the throne when he's the big boss. So I think that's another dynamic that we got to keep our eye on a little bit.
You jokingly say you're down in Magistan, but it's true. I mean, they have moved down to Florida in bulk. I mean, between Broward, Dade, and Palm Beach County, the Trump administration in exile has basically relocated to South Florida. Is that starting to change the politics down there? Are you seeing that on the ground at all?
Oh, absolutely. And listen, let's keep the metaphors going. If this is Magistan, South Florida is Mecca. And it's not just the leadership, Rick. We've seen this. There's a whole ton of MAGA boomer retirees that, as a result of where they are just chronologically, also post-COVID, Florida looks like a real attractive place to set up shop. So when you talk about what it's doing politically, I think there's a demographic thing taking place here that a lot of people aren't so keen on or really focusing on. What used to be just the outpost of the villages, there's already constructions going on for prefabricated, shovel-ready homes that are going to be springing up every month for the next 2 or 3 years. That's another factor that the Democrats, I don't think, have contended with all that well. But yeah, it is the front line for MAGAville here in South Florida.
Well, and with redistricting coming up in Florida, the Republicans, after Amendments 5 and 6 were passed, now almost a decade ago, it looked a lot like Florida was going to have this sort of more even-handed redistricting process. But now the Republicans, just by the sheer migration number of Republicans who moved here from other states, they're going to have a pretty good run with redistricting this year. They're going to pick up at least 2 of those seats, I think, when the lines get drawn.
Oh, I think that's right. And I think that there are some other seats. In the past, no incumbent Republican or Democratic congressman was willing to sacrifice even 2 or 3 points. But you've also got some of these seats that are plus 10, plus 15. Yep. I'm thinking of one like Mario Diaz-Balart. They may just cut 4 or 5 points at his expense and fortify those other seats. So when that new Florida seat comes in, probably somewhere in the center part of the state, I think they're going to have an advantage there too. So that's why I'm kind of leaning in the direction, even though having won Florida in the past, working on the Democratic campaigns for Obama in 08 and 12, I'm not quite as bullish right now, just because I think this numerical demographic thing is real.
Yeah, the bulk of the numbers is significant. Hey, look, it's a little better in terms of amendments 5 and 6. They made redistricting technically nonpartisan, and they set some rules up. But when you add a lot more red to the bucket, it's just going to be harder and harder to find competitive Democratic districts drawn out. And especially because, and dirty little secret redistricting is, Republicans go to the African American members of Congress right away and they say, I'll keep your seat at plus 20. I'll keep your seat at plus 12. And they like that. Look, every politician, R or D, wants a safe seat. And if you drew those numbers down a little bit, made them more competitive districts, you'd end up with the ability to fight a little more effectively at the congressional level, at least in Florida.
Oh, so, boy. You're so right. I don't mean to geek out here for us Florida files, but I remember when Corinne Brown, the congresswoman from North Florida, who's now living it up in the orange jumpsuit style, she was the first to come out against fair districts. To your point, the Republicans have played that game very well, trading off political opportunism for self-preservation.
Yeah, it's one of the things I tell my Democratic friends, and this, we've talked about this a lot. It's like, understand that politics and philosophy and ideology are separate, and Republicans knew that in Florida for a long time. They don't care about anything except the win. The win is the win is the win. Get there however dirty it is, or however much you have to sort of deviate from ideological purity to win. And Democrats haven't always understood that. So it's a tough state. I mean, and it used to be a purple state. It's a trending red state in a lot of ways. But it's also, there are a lot of opportunity spaces here in Florida that Republicans, or Democrats rather, haven't exploited. You have a huge influx of Puerto Rican voters, all these new Caribbean voters that are coming in. They didn't understand how to talk to Venezuelan voters who came in, and the word socialism to those folks is not free health care and universal pre-K. It's Maduro's thugs kicking down the door. So, I mean, I just think there's there are a lot of spaces where they have opportunities here, but they're going to have to get a bit of a shock treatment, I think, to get on with that.
Oh, now you're speaking my language. I mean, yo hablo español too, and you and I know that really the only word to describe Democratic efforts over the last 10 years in Florida, really since the Obama 2012 campaign, has just been malpractice for whatever insane reason. They had a cheat code that they had cracked, and they never decided to follow it again. And the Republicans, to their, I guess, political credit, said, hell no, we're not going to let that happen again. And they've just done a really good job playing the socialism card, the communism card, and even just the I'll be there card. And what I mean by that is, they show up, they go, they do the campaigning. Rick Scott even learned his horrific broken Spanish.
Oh, God. The worst Spanglish in history, worse than mine.
It's
and
awful.
He is just, ¿Dónde está el biblioteca? But he does go to the events. They do post up. It's kind of important. But one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is whether Florida comes out of COVID in the next 6 weeks or 6 months is, I think, really going to affect the 22 elections. Are there some races you're starting to watch? I mean, obviously redistricting is going to change some things. Are there some congressionals you're starting to watch right now that are interesting to you, that you think there's some pickup opportunities in?
Well, again, I look at these 2 seats in Florida, in South Florida, I should say, the seats that were lost in 2020, that, again, depending on what happens in redistricting, but, you got one of those, which is Congresswoman Maria Elvira Salazar's district. Mm-hmm. This was a seat that Joe Biden in 2020 actually won by 4 points, but the incumbent, Donna Shalala, lost by 6. So you're looking at a 10-point swing just on that seat alone. I think the Republicans are going to try and make a calculus and say, do we try and fortify this seat, or do we maybe just, play the high wire act on that one? That is one where I think candidates matter. Right. I'm not quite sure if Donna Shalala running again at 80 something is the right or best choice for that in a district that's 58% Hispanic. So if they can get a good candidate, that could be a pickup. And then the other one is the one where former Congresswoman Debbie Murkisal Powell, she knocked off Carlos Curbelo, who I thought was a fantastic Republican candidate, only to get knocked off in the red tide wave of 2020. So I think those are two where if maybe Debbie runs again, or they can find a Debbie-like candidate, especially in what's looking, Rick, like potentially COVID might not be the issue in 2022. It actually might be abortion. I think they've stepped on a landmine here and woken up a sleeping giant. If that's what this is about, fear the woman voter in Florida.
You know, I was having a conversation with somebody last night about issues that catalyze voters, that sometimes getting what you want is not the right answer politically. And, you know, in 1994, a lot of people are like, oh, 1994 was all about the contract with America. The reason Republicans turned out like crazy in 1994 was the federal assault weapons ban made Republican voters lose their damn minds, and they came out and voted in droves. I think if you see Florida duplicate the Texas law and set up a snitch system, a Floridian Stasi, to go after women who get abortions, whether you agree with that or not, whether you're pro-life or pro-choice, do you want to live in a state where women have to be fearful that people are going to snitch on them to a private website and then get a reward from the state for snitching on somebody for doing that? I think that is a unbelievably slippery slope politically. And I think you're right. I think you may end up with some very pissed off women who end up in that position. And look, you know, if you're a female lobbyist in Texas or Florida, I guarantee you there's a couple of them that have had abortions because of members. I promise you that. I can speak to that with 100% certitude.
You want to name some names? Speaking of Stasi, Rick, should we?
We'll wait on that. One of the people is now retired from the Florida legislature. But long story short, this is a slippery slope, folks. You don't want to be in a world where snitches and are snitching on people for getting a medical procedure, whether you agree with that or not. Yeah, I'm a small L libertarian style Republican, where you can say that abortion has a moral dimension, but you can also say that it's none of the government's fucking business, which has always been my position on a lot of these social things. It's like, I don't care, as long as you're consenting adults, I don't care who you get married to. That's not the government's business. That's a small government philosophy, an individual liberty philosophy. And this is one of those things that is going to move down the chain. It will one day be, okay, well, we've got a snitch who says that a woman went to get an abortion. Well, what about people who are snitching if she's getting birth control pills? What about people who are snitching if she goes to get a boob job? What about people who are snitching, if a guy goes to get an STD test? This is not a culture you want to live in, folks. So, looping back, I think that does really talk about where the female vote in 2022 could end up rising up and causing enormous chaos for the Republicans, as it did in 2018, where you had a lot of Republican women who flipped in 2018 and voted for Democrats.
And Rick, I think we share this opinion. I don't want to assume, of course, but I really do believe, had the Democrats nominated Gwen Graham instead of Andrew Gillum, 100%. I think we'd be talking about Governor Gwen Graham running for re-election today.
100%.
And I also think, ironically enough, when people say, well, how do you explain Nikki Fried winning in 2018? I think it was just she was a woman in the year of the woman as a Democrat running against a man, and she basically just got across the finish line. So, to your point, there are these variables that we don't understand and that could still shape the landscape. And I think if this becomes an issue that, look, the Supreme Court has weighed in for at least now, this thing is the protected law of the land. Unlike COVID, which, if vaccination rates continue to rise and we can keep some of these variants at bay, it may very well peter out this time next year. Certainly, goddamn, the issue of Afghanistan. If Republicans think they're going to be able to ride that into 2022, I think they have another thing coming. But This abortion issue is a whole separate matter. And like you, I watch the polls very closely on all this stuff, and I've yet to see a poll where a majority of Americans, in any clear number, no matter how you explain the issue, want to eliminate Roe versus Wade protections.
That's the thing about abortion in America. We had reached an uneasy consensus as a people about abortion in this country. There are not a lot of people who are like abortion cheerleaders, far extremists on it. But most people are like, okay, I want it to exist I'm not comfortable with it. I don't love it. It's not something I want to go out and brag about. But neither do those people want to say, 6-week heartbeat, or setting up a system where you have to get permission from your husband to go get an abortion, or your parents. There's like I said, it's an uneasy consensus, and this, I think, shatters that consensus. And it does. I mean, legally speaking, pro-choice activists always knew that Roe was as a legal case, Roe had deficiencies that would leave it vulnerable to some shenanigans like this eventually. And this has been a long march on the right, and they've come home on it. So let me get to a couple of questions here. Can you talk about Florida's new method of reporting COVID deaths to make it look like they've sharply declined? DeSantis behind this change. Do not believe anything from the DeSantis administration or anything that his little Floridian Kayleigh McEnany has to say. They are squashing the numbers down. They are spreading out the peanut butter across the bread as much as they can. And look, you don't have to be a Rebecca Jones fan to know that there was shenanigans going on with this from the start.
Yeah, I mean, does anybody dispute the notion that we can all just assume anything that comes out of the DeSantis administration is a lie, and it's a manipulated and it's a doctored, rigged number, if you pardon the expression? I don't think there's any doubt about it. And look, what are they trying to do? They're trying to play, hide the sausage or hide the salami under this coconut shell of COVID deaths. But the fact of the matter is, Rick, we're now at 45,000 plus deaths in Florida. When, before this whole thing transpired, we were still in the low 30s. So it's clearly paid a huge toll. And we're getting to the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon point. We're now starting to get a situation in Florida where everybody doesn't just have someone in their world. It's now a relative or a coworker or even a close friend that's been impacted by this with the worst case scenario. So that's where I think this is changing the game a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Fernand. I think there's been I think the fact that they don't trust the numbers, or that voters and citizens don't trust the numbers, is something that DeSantis should worry about. He'd be better off saying it's bad. Let's take steps. Let's work on it. Get more vaccinations going. But he hasn't tweeted about vaccines. I was told this the other day. I got to check it. Apparently, he hasn't tweeted about vaccines in weeks and weeks and weeks. They're still selling "Don't Fauci My Florida" gear on their store. They're still placating these anti-vax morons. I got in a lot of trouble in 2019 where I said something to the effect on Twitter of, anti-vaccination people make me reconsider whether everyone should have the right to vote. There are a lot of them should be put in a re-education camp at this point.
Well, I mean, to your point, how does one have any kind of sympathy now? I'm not talking about a year ago when the vaccines weren't available to everybody, especially, I don't know about you, but I'm a father of young children. They can't even get the goddamn vaccine. And, you got these my freedom choice stuff.
That's freedom with the gum.
But, it's funny in a way, but it's also sad. And at this point, I think you almost got to let Darwin take its course with these folks because they know better. Sure. They're acting against not just their interest, but the interest of their fellow man. And I think it's really dangerous to all of us.
I see these people at these school board meetings and they terrify me because that's like a window into real Florida. And the people that have gotten vaccinated and who are worried about their kids, and want the ability to decide if their kids should wear a mask at school. Those people sit quietly and horrified by the crazies, but the crazies are everywhere. They're louder and louder and louder. And I mean, some of these people, they are legitimately frightening. And the edge of violence in their voices is legitimately disturbing in this country, or the state and the country more broadly. But I'm worried about, when those people start running for office.
Rick, I got to tell you, and I'm sure you feel the same way. To me, like the miracle, the staggering, unbelievable miracle that proves like America is a blessed nation is that we haven't had more of these like popping off incidents, people going crazy because all of the signs, they're in front of us. You could probably count just today 4 or 5 videos that are going to go viral of these Nimrods doing their thing. And to me, it's remarkable that we haven't had more violence, that we haven't had more incidents of these nut jobs, going postal.
It's true, and the degree to which they exist in that Facebook, social media, anti-vax ecosystem, and believe shit that just isn't real. It's a disturbing thing. We don't have an agreed upon set of facts anymore, and I think those people represent a super dangerous aspect of the future. All right, another question here. Wouldn't disclosing an abortion be an actual violation of HIPAA? I'm no lawyer, but I think if you're a healthcare worker and you expose somebody's name after a medical procedure of any kind, you're violating HIPAA. I think if you're a private snitch, you're not covered by the same restrictions as HIPAA. But again, this is one of those things. Do you want to live in a state or a country where there's a snitch culture reporting women for getting abortions? Do you want to live in that country? It's a tough question, and I don't think Republicans have thought that one through.
What I love about the question is it just makes so clear, again, something you probably agree with me on, Rick, that the Supreme Court is now more partisan than the RNC and the DNC. I mean, that is a political body, make no bones about it, because even a dime store amateur armchair lawyer like you and me, who are not legally trained ones, we were right there in that question. That just does not pass the smell test. Yet the court took this up overnight, and all of a sudden a 5-4 majority says yes. I don't think that's why over time this is going to stand. And I'll tell you what else. When people and the Republicans start seeing the poll plummet as a result of this, I think you're going to all of a sudden see the Supreme Court maybe relitigate this before stuff goes to ballots again.
Yeah, I think that's the case. Okay, another question. When does the DeSantis versus Trump feud start? It's on.
Well, that's what we're saying. It's already on. But I'll tell you when it's going to get real. I have yet to see, Rick, at least in the public realm. I've seen a couple private ones. I know you have. The Trump versus DeSantis head-to-head matchups in the GOP primary. Once DeSantis starts getting into double digits, no matter how big Trump's lead is, that's when you're going to see a little ETTD action come out of the orange man.
Oh, yeah. And the fact that Ron DeSantis has a better looking wife and he's thinner and more popular than Trump these days with Rupert Murdoch and the Fox guys, it's eating at Trump. It's grinding away at him right now. He's down in Mar-a-Lago or up in Bedminster, chewing the scenery, hating this guy so much.
Well, and if people think that that's crazy talk from Rick, let me just let you do a little victory lap again. Brad Parscale was literally removed from the campaign. Folks, trust me on this. Don't take Rick's word for it, because of the Lincoln Project's ad that showed him partying up on the boats with, all the scantily clad, nubile, comely Florida women, because it got under Trump's skin. That who is this guy having the fun that I should be having on my name and expense? So you're absolutely right about that.
Yeah, he's gonna take a bad hit, I think. Well, folks, we're out of time almost. We've got about a minute and a half left. I just want to thank my friend Fernand for coming on today. We will talk again soon, my friend. And stay safe down there in South Florida, and try to avoid the denizens of Magistan who have come to infest the area.
Thanks, brother. And you hold the fort down up there in North Florida, Tally Town, my old stomping grounds.
All right, talk to you soon, man. Thanks, everybody.